Please keep in mind the abridged guide will have more dense information than the PowerPoint presentation, and the full version has even more dense info. We encourage you to utilize the QR codes in your packet if you'd like to refer to the full version of this section as we go along today. Please note, this is still the January 2025 draft that we are reviewing today. So there are certain things we've already learned in previous forums that we will be applying in the edits across the board, such as general formatting, including more tech crew-focused perspective, and removing emotional or flowery language. So don't necessarily feel like if you're like, there's a typo here, we'll probably catch that, right? We don't need to necessarily spend time on that today. The main feedback we are seeking from you today is regarding the big picture, tangible ideas and philosophy of the document. That said, all feedback is good feedback, and we'd like to offer, and if you'd like to offer the committee any guidance that we're unable to make time for today, please, we encourage you to email us at any time, or you can also fill out one of our feedback forms available on our website. One last disclaimer, while the entirety of this document contains potentially triggering subject matter, today's topics in particular touch on very sensitive issues. And in fact, these topics really get at the heart of why this initiative felt necessary in the first place. So please take care of yourselves as we discuss and go through. Feel free to leave the room at any time. And as always, show immense respect to your community members who have also made the choice to show up and contribute today. To ensure a respectful, inclusive, and productive environment for all participants, we ask that everyone follow these general rules during the forum. And I'm going to read through our forum decorum. Use facilitators to ask questions. Please direct your questions through our facilitators. Today, Natalie will be your facilitator. Wait to be called on before speaking to help maintain order and ensure everyone has the opportunity to participate. Maintain a respectful atmosphere. To allow all voices to be heard and to preserve the forum as a neutral space, we ask that you refrain from clapping, cheering, booing, or otherwise reacting audibly to speakers. Keep the forum free from personal complaints. This forum is not the appropriate space to discuss complaints against individuals or theater companies. We ask all participants to respect this boundary and focus on broader, constructive dialogue related to the KCTSI guidelines. Stay on schedule. In the interest of time and fairness, the committee may move the conversation forward to cover all planned topics. We appreciate your understanding and cooperation. If we do not address your question or concern, please submit your comment in writing for future consideration. And speak from personal experience. When offering examples or perspectives, please speak from your own experience rather than sharing or interpreting someone else's. This helps maintain clarity and accountability in the conversation. Thank you for contributing to a thoughtful and respectful discussion. Now, today's forum will cover children's theater, diversity and inclusion, intimacy, violence, and movement, sexual harassment, and equal access and accommodations. There may be a few minutes left at the end for additional questions. And I'm going to start us off with children's theater. Please grab a packet if you haven't already and follow along. Hi, welcome. Yeah, help yourself to materials at the back of the room. Grab some snacks, get comfy. And I'll start reading through children's theater.
Yep.
Yeah, there should be pens, pencils, anything your hearts may desire. All right, children's theater. The community is responsible for providing young people with agency, a voice, tools to engage, and an expectation of healthy relationships and a safe work environment. Parents and guardians are entering into an unfamiliar world, which puts them at a disadvantage to advocate for their children. One of our strongest attributes is a robust, nationally recognized children's theater. Since children enter into any room at a systemic disadvantage, these concerns about safety and power dynamics are arguably more important when dealing with youth. Goals. It is essential that we teach our young people what they have a right to expect, and that we demand all adults be committed to creating a safe, welcoming, and accountable environment. Tactics. Make sure children are never unattended and apply the rule of 3, that there must be never fewer than 3 people alone in a room with a child. Doors to all spaces should be left open when possible. Maintain transparent communication and set clear expectations between parents, guardians, and the company. Educate about policies, provide access to info and personnel, and encourage questions. Always approach parents in good faith. Treat children with the same dignity and respect as you would an adult, providing age-appropriate structure and a proper workflow. If you ever become aware of an incident involving a child and an adult, say something. Potential ramifications of this are outside of the scope of this document. Internal company policies should be enacted and adhered to. Actions. When hiring someone to work with children, perform a background check. If someone fails a background check, or if details do come to light after they are hired, they must be removed/penalized in the manner most in line with the company's policies and standards. Recheck any adults working directly with young people every 3 years. Educate adults to be aware of power imbalances between adults and children, which can lead to grooming, and between children, which can lead to bullying. Ensure that there is a clear reporting structure to address these issues. When in question, refer directly to child labor laws as outlined in Kansas and Missouri's Department of Labor. So now as we open it up to discussion, feel free to, this is helpful, thank you. Feel free to comment anything that you like that's already in there, anything that's missing, anything that we can stand to build on at all. And Natalie, I'm gonna go ahead and hand the mic to you now. Thank you.
What was the question? I didn't hear.
I just said the way she presented it, it seemed very didactic, and as it should be, but us educators are going to do that after.
So I guess my first clarification is between children's theater and working with children because while we do have a very robust children's theater community, which I claim as my own, and was a child in children's theater, professional children's theater, I think that's just kind of a clarification point on what we're expecting from children's theater versus children working in professional.
Yeah, so the question was, what's the difference or the clarification between children's theater versus working with children in theater?
Yeah. Natalie will be doing that, by the way, to make sure we have a good report on it. Thank you. Sorry, my theater voice comes out at all times. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. That's good. That's a really good one.
It's a really, really good point. Thank you, Jen. Taking that into consideration moving forward, that needs to be separated. Yeah.
Sure. So, do you want to respond to that? Maybe slightly. Okay.
I do think a lot of the tips in here, the tactics, would apply regardless.
Right.
If, like you're doing Annie, for instance, or something like that. Like, I would say definitely this first one, make sure the children are never alone, unattended by someone who isn't assigned to them. Clear expectations as well. If there's like a room for the child actors to be in versus the adult actors. My first instinct is that would be production by production. Whoever's running it would set up how those are divided, what the interactions are. I have not personally been in a lot of shows with children. I was in Annie in high school. So there were children, I never interacted with them, and they had their own classroom that they would sit in. They would like run all the way from that classroom to the hallway and onto the stage.
Right. So I think that's kind of where the difference in some of this that I see is that working at a children's theater and working with children is different than working at like another theater and having a child in a show. I just think that's maybe two different. I'm not trying to make this complicated, but it seems like two different subjects a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I'm wanting to see if we. Can talk about what those differences might be. Like what would constitute something that would need to be stated differently for a company that was working with children than a company that was specifically tailored to children's theater. We don't have that answer right now.
Right, for
That's
sure.
kind of a question.
I'm seeing if I'm understanding the question differently. Are you saying that there is a difference between like having children in the shows and doing shows that are meant for children?
Yes.
Okay. And having that be like two different sections of being a performer, any professional working in theater where like the shows are made for children versus like another section which would be working with kids in the show.
Correct.
Okay.
Because I think
I think you're definitely right that those are two very separate.
I mean, the mentality you come into a children's theater where is different than the mentality you come into directed adult. I mean, I don't even know how to say specifically non-children's theater. So, I mean, I was a child who worked at the children's theater, and there were a lot of protections that should have been in place for me as a child who worked at a children's theater. But because it was a children's theater, there were assumptions made that there were already protections there because it was a children's theater.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I hear what you're trying to say. Let me write this down.
Sorry, I don't know.
I'm sorry, I got
That's
it.
excellent. I was wondering if it would be worthwhile to have something about workshops. You know, there's so many workshops based around working with kids in the theater or just on the line, that this applies to that if a theater company or organization is having workshops or classes, that these also apply, not just for performance.
That's a good point. Making sure that having a workshop needs protections just as much as a production or a theater, a children's theater. Thank you.
To me, this is working with children guidelines.
Thank you. I was curious if any language should be considered regarding working with or being around children involved in a youth show, but not happening within a theater. I'm thinking about the different spaces in which we are interacting with children, even though we are still under the company. If there is a cast party, if something is happening in someone's home, do these rules still apply even when we are outside of the physical theatrical space?
Sure, making sure that these rules still apply in spaces that are not the theater, but still a part of the theater activities or after parties and things like that. Thank you, that's a good point.
My fear is that even the theater's policies and protections, people would no longer consider them in effect if they are not at the theater space.
I was wondering about the place where it talks about children never unattended, doors to all spaces should be left open when possible. And I wondered how that would be in regard to, I've heard testimony from an actress who told me that when she was 12 years old, she had to share a dressing room with all the adult actors, and there was one dressing room in the theater for everyone. And male actors of the cast were commenting on how she was developing as a young woman. And she went to the artistic director to complain, and he told her that it would hurt the career of that actor if she pursued it. So like dressing room situations are problematic because not every theater has the same facilities for dressing rooms.
And I will say, Mark, we have there's a section that we addressed in our last forum that is specifically about private spaces and green rooms. I think it's labeled something like that. And so I know a lot of that will tie into that. In general, because I know some of you are joining us for the first time, that is sort of a lot of this document, is we'll discuss things, and don't take it as a throwaway if we say, oh, that's in another section. But just know that this, that's very important to deal with in this section, but we also have a larger section too that's like all about that. Yeah.
We want those things to be negotiated between the company and the performers.
Yeah.
We want those things to be negotiated between the company and the performers, right? Right.
Anything else about this section? This is great, by the way, and again, because this is kind of just a very fluid format, this is exactly what it should be. We want to hear what you think about it, what it's missing, what it needs.
For the training spaces, I know it's in a different section, but some guidance could be looking at like the NWSL. They've been having some alterations with like the younger players competing with the older like adult players, so that could be something to look to. When it says educate adults to be aware of power imbalances, offering resources for that education. So Boxer provides stewards of children training, which is like a best practices such as not being alone, having doors open and things like that. So having references to that could be super helpful. To the point of spaces, also considering like guidance of like 21 and older spaces as well. I understand that there's like an want to graduate into like developing spaces, but having those age restrictions and then why are those a part of it, whether that's education for staff or for, talent and things like that. And then the only other question that I think I had was child labor laws are super effective, these guidance are super effective, but maybe perhaps some guidance of metrics of safety for the content of the presentation, or how to provide support for students and adolescents who are going through the acting journey, because not every piece of performance is age appropriate, but requires young talent to maybe highlight that problem and things like that. And so what are the safeguards in place to provide emotional support or therapy so that students don't lose themselves earlier in their career, because of the result of taking on characters that might be mature in nature, that stories need to be told, but maybe some guidance like that might also be helpful for this area.
Thank you, Marley. Thank you for that. You said the NWSL.
Yes.
What does that stand for?
That's the National Women's Soccer League.
National Women's Soccer League.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, that's fine. Thank you for that.
To a lot of you, so.
We can get Natalie,
What?
we can get you up on your feet. Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second. We're gonna recap a little what you said, because it's real hard to hear on the feed.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got some notes here that I just want to recap for the Zoom audience, because you're a little further away from our mic, which is over here.
Gotcha.
And I think the mask probably is making it hard to understand. So can you recap that for us?
Yeah, I think somewhat, yeah. Just noting that there's a lot of guidelines that we can look to, for example, the National Women's Soccer League, acknowledging things like 21 and older spaces, and generally looking for metrics of safety, ways to guide adolescents going through this journey. The very abridged version of what Marley said, yeah. Yeah, but I think, it's going to be
And real quick, I just want to read something from online. It might be worth to define children. There are children and there are older minors. There's a different level of care that is necessary. For example, making sure those under 21 aren't allowed access to alcohol at theater functions. And I'm going to editorialize because, that may not be a children rule, right? It's easy for children, but minors is another rule here. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. The reason why I love so much of what is in here is because I see it aligning with a lot of the policies that I do think already exist within some of the both specific children's theaters and other theaters that have policies or clauses that work with children. I was recently at a conference which reminded me about the fact that some theater leaders and organization leaders or administrators have certain policies in place, but are not that great about checking to make sure if they are updated, making sure that they have the latest version of these policies. I wonder if there's something in this language that not only, or in this initiative, that can encourage theater leaders not just to have those policies available, but to check against whatever policies that we have nationally in the children's theater space and make sure whatever policies they have are the most current and that they are always being explained at first day of rehearsal via the stage management, that it's not something that's just being glossed over, because at least in my experience, sometimes we get used to saying the same thing over and over, that very important rules and guidelines for people who might have been there for the first time get glanced over, or people are sitting on a children's safety document that's 20 years old and that just needs to be updated. And I think it would be great to have a reminder in here for the theaters that receive this and think, oh, we already have that stuff already outlined. Check. Make sure that it aligns with this. Make sure that it's the most updated,
I think just after listening more that really maybe that subsection should be something like working with children, minors in children's theater and professional, or, and other theater, just something more clear.
And I would add to that parents, that you have to organize them as well too. When I did shows out at theater in the park, we had casts of thousands of kids out there, and we just built a big tent and they all just hung out there, and the moms themselves just took care of who was on rotation to take care of things, babysit, bring ice cream, all that good stuff, because they love to do that. So.
Okay, this also might be another section, and I know we're going to talk about intimacy and consent as well, but guidance for consent rules as well, because your laws, regulations, and consent for publishing photos and videos of adolescents, children's, minors, fill in the blank, all of those words have different implications and requirements. So whether that's providing just like a very generic consent form so that they can have photos or videos published, getting that to the parents, guardians, and then also I think that having some, I think you all already do, yeah, guardians and parents, just consistent that language of being more inclusive, because it can make sure that, you know, guardians are also included in that conversation, could be really helpful too.
All right, anything else? Should we go to the next section?
Reverbing. I just think there should be certain consideration around working in a children's theater and certain expectations. There should be a certain accountability level when you are doing children's theater. It, like, I don't know what that would look like and why it's different, but it feels different, and it feels like that's a part of what was missing, or the evolution of that. So I guess I will continue to think on it, what that looks like.
I was just going to comment that children's theater employs adult actors all the time, lots of them actually, with children, and regular theaters employ children actors with adult actors all the time. So I think it should be across the board. You know, it should be a rule that applies to all theater in general in our human resources, because it's going to be the same way, isn't it? Going to be? Don't we want to treat children the same way, regardless of the kind of theater that they're working in?
Darrington.
Just to, and forgive me and please cut me off if this is like not a part of what we're supposed to be doing here, but just adding to that conversation from the performer perspective, and I think a big reason for this initiative and this collective is to acknowledge the reality that while all theaters, children or otherwise, employ children and adults, because it is a job for most of us, first and foremost, a lot of people are going to be hired and enter this space that do not have the training, have not gone through a situation or information like this, and frankly, don't even like kids. And so I think it's important to remember that while a lot of things should be, we are often going to be opening our theater doors to people who do not know and do not care about this training, but that is not an excuse as to why they should not have it. I think it's just important to know that as we continue to flesh out the language of this document, it is made not only for the people who care about kids, which is what you would hope would show up in a space like this, but for the people who don't and who need it spelled out in a way like this to make sure that everyone stays safe.
This also brings up a really interesting intersection for child-based abuse, which is child-on-child-based forms of abuse. And that's also not really outlined here. It says, if you become aware of an incident involving a child and an adult, say something. That's one of the like classic stereotypes, and statistically a lot what happens. But again, to the point of like privacy rooms and things like that, discouraging, you know, changing at the same time, even in like a child space and things like that, just kind of preparing people to have resources available. So if it is out of their area expertise, whether that's because expertise or interests, they can still have references, because that's something that can happen a lot, is child-based abuse versus a child and child, things like that, whether that's malicious or just curiosity based off of, you know, childhood development parameters.
And one last thing from our online folks I'm going to just sort of summarize this, but the point is some care should be taken about using parents as minders or people in the room to watch over these child spaces, mostly because the advice online, and I think it's probably worth considering, is that the adult minders should have training and background checks, and parents are not necessarily going to have either of those or consent to background checks to be there with their kid to take care of all the other kids and bring ice cream or whatever. So that's from our online.
And we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you all very much. That was very helpful. We'll move on to diversity and inclusion now.
I did want to bring up one extra thing, though, just as a reminder that we have a Google response form online that you can access. So outside of this space, as you're brainstorming, you think of ideas, you're like, ooh, this would apply. You can go online, you can fill that out, and I believe it's specific enough. You can say which section you're talking about, even which page number you're talking about, and put a little blurb, whatever your idea is.
That's correct. That's not the link that you have today, though. We have a few different types of feedback forms. We have a general big feedback form, and then we have individual feedback forms for every live forum. Everything's available on the website, though. Thank you.
Okay. Next section is diversity and inclusion. Kansas City's theater community has a long and fraught history concerning discrimination. While great progress has been made, there are still problematic behaviors and systemic issues that must be addressed. As of right now, the city is presenting more non-white productions for a dominant white audience than ever before. However, representation on stage for minority communities is still a challenge. Oftentimes, companies will have an entire season lineup with no Black or non-white productions. Even when one is present, this tends to be treated or perceived as a one-off with a low chance of being repeated. It is also still a struggle to get cast in older scripts with traditionally or historically white and or heteronormative characters. Our goals for this: we should meet the diverse needs of Kansas City with enthusiasm and an expanded repertoire of works. It is important for the integrity of the art that we create that we build a culture that is inclusive, diverse, and safe for all. And our tactics on this: educate yourself on the history and the context of the play that you choose to produce. A lot of Western scripts that contain minority or underrepresented characters resort to tokenism or shallow inclusions of these groups to meet a perceived quota of diversity without necessarily respecting or representing those groups fairly. Use careful consideration of costuming when casting or running a production involving diverse cultural or sexual gender identities. Do specific research into regionalities to ensure the most accurate depiction possible. Consider body type or physical appearance when casting around ethnicity or around gender. Old ideas about what is and is not a normal body still perpetuate themselves, and American theater in particular has a history of gawkery and sensationalism around perceived deviations from a romantic white ideal. If you cannot cast appropriately, consider whether it is necessary to put on the show anyway. And if so, please continue to do research and educate yourself as to the best way to present the material with integrity. Also, make sure to get the consent of whoever you choose to cast in this role. When it comes to casting and hiring for productions, it is unacceptable to discriminate against a well-qualified candidate based on the person's race, including hairstyle or texture, appearance, color, national origin, age, pregnancy, parental status, medical information, religion, disability status, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, genetic information, or marital status. And finally, go local. There are tons of local artists waiting to express themselves and put their works up publicly. Whenever possible, offer them compensation as well. And then some actions. When building a season for your company, consider your overall goals and theming. Is there an opportunity for a broader selection of playwrights, genres, time periods, settings, etc.? Can you serve the material fairly with the right talent, right crew, and with the appropriate perspectives? Educate yourself and your team on concepts around stereotyping and stay mindful of how it can influence your personal artistic process. If a person indicates that something has been said or done to them that was hurtful or discriminatory, it must be addressed, acknowledged, and corrected. It must also be made clear that there will be zero ramifications to the injured party, including, but not limited to, unfair treatment, blacklisting, harassment or intimidation, or any other forms of punitive punishment. That's that section. Any questions about that?
I can always talk. It feels a little bit like the diversity and inclusion section and the equal access and accommodations somewhat overlap. As someone who meets 3 of these different categories. Unfortunately they do. So that was my only point right there.
There is some overlap between a lot of these different sections, a lot of intersectionality. We decided to keep a lot of that in there because we feel like a lot of the broad categories still need their own categories, but we know that you want to take a lot of the same considerations for a lot of them. If there is something that you think, like what you were talking about with the difference between children's theater and theater involving children, if there's something that you're like, this is really distinct and specific, and maybe this should be its own section, then let us know about that for sure.
And one of the reasons for that is an understanding realistically that sometimes theaters flip to the page that the section that they're interested in, and they might need to be reminded of in both sections if they don't read the other one.
You gave me this before I was ready. You were so fast, but I'll keep it. I just wanted to share something that I've learned. So, yeah. I'm a suit now, right? I work in casting at the Rep. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt, and I'm mainly here, honestly, to listen. But I found out something really crazy that each season, I believe all equity theaters, but at least ours, is to complete and return to equity a seasonal casting practices survey. So we are asked to keep track of the demographics of everyone who comes to our auditions. Numbers of women, people of color, people with disabilities. We are asked to track that via an official equity document and return that to them at the end of each season. Uh, I don't know if that's been happening, but it's going to now that I work there. And if this is something that is a requirement, I'm going to have to do some more research to see what theaters are asked to do this, if it's a difference of size, if it's a different of what agreement they have with equity. But I think the shining star in this section is education and accountability. And if we are already asked to be being accountable by equity, I wonder if there's any language we can include in here that asks theaters to make these numbers, to check to see if they're even taking them, and then to ask if they can be shown, if people request to know what the audition turnout was, if that makes sense in relation to the casting that they see in the season, if that knowledge can be public. And even if it can't be public, is if there's some way we can access to see if they're even taking this information, and if there's a way to hold them true to who they are advertising their auditions to, who shows up, and who they end up casting.
Equity, non-equity, that little clause.
A great question. Because a theater that has an agreement with equity is going to be the ones required to report. That is a good question. That's an excellent point of clarification. The question was, is this policy only to report the equity members' classifications that come in? And it appears so. It appears that at least the requirement is only to count the equity members. But thank you for bringing that to my attention, because now that I know that, I think it should also be asked that if you're going to be counting anyway, count everyone, and then make those statistics available as well. I don't know. I would not just count the equity members.
Back here.
Yeah, I really like this section a lot, and it's really important for Kansas City in so many ways. And I was just wondering, in the actions, this might be, would it be too bold to put in action asking that theater professionals go out of their way, go above and beyond, go above the normal? Because people talk about it, but you really do have to go out of your way to try to be more inclusive and diverse. And that brings up a whole nother part of the educational process of working with all different kinds of groups with different interests and learning about all of them. But I just wondered, I just feel like we have to, in order to make this happen and to make up for hundreds of years of systemic racism in Kansas City, like a number of years ago, the Kansas City Star did an apology to their readers. I think it was in 2020. They apologized for hundreds of years of racist reporting and misrepresenting the Black community of Kansas City. And it made national news when they did that, you know, and it was a big thing for them to do. And then that set up a whole system of, how are we going to do this better? What will we do to be better at reporting on and representing specifically the Black community in Kansas City? So I just wondered if another action could be put in there that more than encourages us to go beyond what we already are doing.
Yeah, I think that that's super helpful and like poignant at the times right now and things like that. Something that I was reflecting on while reading this is, was there a specific reason that you all elected to use the terminology of non-white when you were all forming the document itself?
Far away. On top of it. Yeah, that's a good question. Cool, yeah. I'm not sure that we had a specific reason for that, other than maybe what's coming to mind is that there's a lot of sort of gray area around terms like BIPOC and POC, and a lot of people have a lot of different feelings about it. And Latinx. Yeah, so I think we just kind of thought non-white because we're talking about non-white minorities, because yeah, but I would love to hear your fallback to that too.
So something recently that's been in the development in cultural studies is like cultural humility. So I think using some of that terminology might be helpful when guiding this conversation. To your point of understanding other people's understanding of rhetoric and things like that, I do also, for feedback and things, for context, I have studied critical studies for a long time and very heavily interested in all of the things. But some of the critique of using non-white is it still presupposes that that's the dominant norm and uses it as a centering point to then jump off and refer back to other diverse groups that are not always focused as. So there's some terminology like the global majority has also arisen as well. But I just wonder if to your point of like being more intentional with those rhetorical choices in this document, whether that's just simply of like, we acknowledge that this is happening because of this, could also kind of allow the readers to see themselves in it rather than still focusing on like the white supremacist institutions that we're trying to dismantle in this conversation. And then also just thinking about, to the point of belonging, right, and reparations as well. I think that it's really interesting that your actions, lastly, right, ensures that the injured party is the focus, right, but also thinking about beyond just injury, how do you equate or advocate for belonging? And so instead of diversity and inclusion, now a lot of the critical studies focus on idea, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. But without that, you're still lacking belonging, right? And so focusing on belonging, because knowing that you can create an inclusive and accessible experience, but if they don't feel like they belong, then those, positive outcomes as well as systemic formats of change might not actually be, felt. Yeah.
Quickly on the heteronormative characters and disability in diversity and inclusion. I think I just have to say this. I don't know if it's a thing you can incorporate into this document, but what show tells you how the character entered on the stage? What show tells you that a character walked on the stage specifically, or used a cane, or used a wheelchair? So I'm just trying to say, like, thinking outside of that, that's not specified in every show, like in most shows. It's just saying so and so entered stage right. It didn't say so and so entered stage right with a cane. So why does it matter if I enter stage right with a cane? So I guess I would challenge to push past those expectations. I think that's what this document is saying. But that's just trying to fight the heteronormative slash I'm a non-binary person who plays men often. And I also get auditioned with, I mean, when I audition for shows, I tend to get grouped with the people of color. So it's a very interesting, like, yeah, it is like it's like we're the little exception group that we can pull from, and sometimes it does feel like that. So
Any other thoughts?
Actually, not. Maybe there is space for it in here, but I think that people should be encouraged and empowered to ask theaters if they have a goal of local casting, if there is a percentage that they are striving to achieve each season, if that changes and what goes into making the decision as to who is being cast local, who is not, how many, and if there's a reason why.
That wonderful thought gave me a gray cloud that I have to bring up, which is thinking about maybe not super funded, like alone organizations, but like grant funding, and how that may run antithetical. I can't believe I'm saying this, to some of the administrative expectations happening right now and things like that, which is not our burden to carry, but I think is at least something I wanted to say, because that's such a great expectation to be able to break down the silo of how things are operating. But unfortunately, there are some things like in the nonprofit world where unfortunately they are asking you to alter your programming, your metrics, and things like that, that are, in my personal opinion, disgusting. But just something that I also wanted to say, that if there is some way to kind of navigate that, or if you find that this is a problem, like here are some other like resources again, which I think I know you all are using, but man, that gray cloud was heavy. So sorry.
I've been kind of thinking about that after talking about the recording of who comes in, and this, a couple years ago, there was a lot of discussion with at Arts KC about grantors and getting funding, because we were saying that people don't like to be asked what they're, they don't want to be labeled. And so, thinking about that, so in Fringe right now we have an Amplified Voices lottery, but we're thinking how do we make sure that we want our numbers to look like the city as much as we can. How do we make sure we get those numbers? And so how is it okay to ask? Because I know even, yeah, I mean, we don't have casting calls, but we have the lottery, which we lay out what includes amplified voices. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah. I mean, like for Fringe, we only work with facilities that have full accessibility. Like we'll step away from a space if they don't. But I guess we don't have that anywhere blasted everywhere. But it's just an interesting thing, and then all the stuff that you're talking about, where we're changing what we can give money to, or what language we can use to receive money.
We need to go ahead and move on, actually. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Did you want to say something? Yeah. Is that all?
Sorry, this won't take long. So something we may consider is having a form that can be used. Obviously, it's important to say voluntary information on that, and I think we probably have that in here, but that is advice for the theaters too. You absolutely can ask all these things, but that demographic information is always voluntary. And if they don't want to give it, you won't have it. But I think a lot of people will, especially under the umbrella of this is this kind of program, and we do want to hear those voices. And I think just asking is one thing, but asking and saying why is useful.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break now. I'm sorry to cut us off. That's sort of the nature of this. Obviously, we have a lot more we could say about this, but we're working with time constraints. Take 5. We'll come back roughly 3 to 5 minutes. Grab a snack. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. We're going to go ahead and keep going with intimacy, violence, and movement.
All right. Intimacy, violence, and movement. Intimacy and combat choreography is a heightened and potentially dangerous subset of rehearsal. It is vital to approach all instances of violence or intimacy with extra care and to always have a professional in the room. Goals: to establish safety standards for intimacy, combat, and movement choreography, always keeping artists' safety as top priority. Tactics: intimacy choreography should adhere to the same requirements as combat and movement choreography, utilizing the rule of 3. Do not default to encouraging the talent to feel it out or otherwise stumble through what should be a precise and practiced series of steps. In addition, boundaries of the talent must be respected and negotiated with. Physical mental check-ins are even more important here than they are in general rehearsal and should always be performed before starting any session. If the script says for a certain action and one or more talent is not comfortable, this should either be negotiated prior to the start of any rehearsal and should even be included as part of your audition disclosure, or negotiated with yourself, the talent, and the choreographer on the first rehearsal to the satisfaction of all parties. Negotiating with individual talent about these established boundaries should not occur in front of other members of the production team, especially if a sensitivity or boundary issue has already been mentioned. Work to eliminate ambiguity by initiating conversations in a safe, constructive manner. When talking about intimate or violent movement, you cannot be too meticulous. Be upfront and transparent with what expectations are and react honestly to any reservations talent may have. Actions. When designing the rehearsal schedule with your stage manager, mark out specific dates when combat and intimacy choreography will occur. Outline what is needed and at what level of intensity, mental, physical, or otherwise. It is also best practice for the stage manager to include this information in their reports after the rehearsal has occurred. When possible, have a licensed professional handle your choreography. Even simple actions have a language, mechanical flow, and safety concerns that professionals recognize and are aware of.
Just putting this out there, one thing we're already very aware of and that we've discussed in previous forums is the sort of gray area expectation of certification when it comes to intimacy, choreography, coordination, that there's a lot to be more clearly defined when it comes to just that. And on top of that too, we are specifically going to be seeking experts. So we're not just sort of guessing because none of us are intimacy certified. We do know some people who are intimacy certified who we will be bringing in to help tailor this kind of language and answer some of those questions for us.
The last I heard that they didn't have a certification for intimacy. Okay.
There's like multiple.
Yeah.
Some of them.
My understanding is there's multiple places you can get certified. Some are like a 2-year program and some are like a 6-week program.
Yeah, I took,
Yeah, there's several prominent people in our community that are certified intimates coordinators now.
I just took the 3 classes and they said, okay, you can go at it. And I took the classes so that I wouldn't have intimacy choreographers wasting a lot of time. I got
So Kevin King, thank you. It mentions in Zoom, it depends on the school as to whether there is a certification.
Thank you. I was going to ask the question if there was any guidance on, again, like outside environment workspaces, right? So discouraging intimate practice outside of regulated hours, or support systems could be something to highlight as a tactic as well, because then there's no protocol parameters and things like that. And then also perhaps exploring some HR guidance as far as like disclosing intimate relationships as they bloom, as they that they already exist, could also be helpful. As we know, sometimes you start liking people, and we might want to make sure that that's reciprocated in a healthy, regulated manner as best we could, because I know that those lines sometimes can get blurred. And then having that guidance as well, if there are any falls out of those relationships as well, how to encourage professional working environments when talent or individuals may have conflicting things, whether that is guidance of removing someone because they've overcrossed boundaries and like people do not feel safe in those environments, or if it is, interpersonal conflict management in a sense of you only have to work together during this time, during these expected times, and things like that could also be helpful.
I was wondering if maybe there, like you said, there's a lot of gray area, right? Were you referring to this? Like maybe there could be a moment where you just talk about how theater is unlike any other profession, where we actually do have moments where we have to kiss a coworker or have an intimacy. And I mean, it makes it really different from every other kind of job people can have. And we don't always talk about that openly. But it's part of the work.
The placement of intimacy coordinators in our community, to me, is one of those things that at first it was hard to get used to, just because it wasn't how I was raised in the theater world. It was you do it, and it's a thing you're comfortable with, whether you like it or not. So it wasn't a thing the first time I worked. I wasn't great at it the first time I worked with an intimacy director, because I was like, why are you bossing me? But the thing is I just think it's one of those things with theater that that change comes, and this is one of those changes that you got to get used to, and that there should no longer be this gray area of, is it weird if I'm kissing my coworker? No, this is a step-by-step thing. Yeah, and this is also a small community. I had to kiss one of my old teachers, theater teachers, once. Yeah, so.
From online. The verbiage that was read said something relating to discussion about boundaries shouldn't be held in front of other production team members. This language could be tweaked a little, since ideally the intimacy choreographer, director, and SM would be there, stage manager. So there may be multiple parties involved. It is true that you shouldn't have those discussions in front of other cast members or lighting technicians, etc. But editorializing, maybe a list of who should be in that room is appropriate.
I think that was our original intent with it, but we can definitely clarify the language so you know for sure that's what we're talking about.
correct me if I'm wrong, if this is in a different section, but per violence, guidance if someone gets actually hurt might also be helpful.
As we're talking about, we've brought it up a lot that a lot of these sections overlap and kind of double dip in other areas. And we made the very intentional choice to label this one the way that we did to include all of this, because one point that I believe we read aloud, is that, and sort of like that Jen was speaking to, that intimacy is not something that has always been thought of as this technical necessity. And so starting to view it with the same lens that we have viewed fight choreography is a big part of why this is all crammed into one section like that. Just making that point.
I also see it as a combo with dance. It's all choreography. Like I also grew up, in the 90s and all that, when the norm was still, and it was true in theaters, true in movies, everywhere. When it's time for a sex scene, you just smoosh the actors together and hope that chemistry just occurs. And I know in the past, the excuse has been made that it's for rawness, it's for the purpose of spontaneity and things like that. But I have always been of the idea that you are an actor, you're working, you're a professional. Spontaneity is part of your job to generate the spontaneity, even if something like this has been choreographed. So to me, there's nothing but good things about having intimacy choreography work now, and not even just for the safety of the actors involved, but just the fact that you're putting on a play. You're putting on a rehearsed, practiced series of events to tell a story. And the intimacy is part of that. And if we choreograph fights, if we choreograph every other element of it with blocking and things like that, then intimacy is easily part of that. It's about presenting the story to people, not about just making them uncomfortable or turned on or whatever. It's fits the themes of the story. It fits the character moments, the flow of it, the pacing, all of that. It's all important.
To the point of making intimacy technically on the same level of movement and violence choreography, could there be a line that highlights the way that intimate violence can be depicted appropriately, in that that is a separate thing from intimacy and violence? Intimate violence, which we know can be really impactful, but it can also be really harmful. And so maybe it's something along the lines as when we're bringing up a show, we're an informed audience, informed consent, whether that's through flyering and things like that, so that they're also informed of what they might be signing up for. I think Whim, they did a really good job one time of like, you might see some general nudity, just so you know, like at the beginning. So those preface and reminding ourselves to use content warnings instead of trigger warnings, because triggers are super specific and we cannot always account for individuals' realities. So just kind of, that's another thing of consideration.
Along to sexual harassment. Yeah.
We're moving on to sexual harassment. All right. Dealing in an industry of emotional work, it can be easy for individuals to blur the lines of appropriate behavior. We engage in social debate about what constitutes chemistry, artistic freedom, or harassment. Sexual power dynamics and the imbalances that are an undercurrent throughout any kind of emotional, physical, or intimate work. This is further complicated by personal relationships outside of work. Sexual harassment should never be tolerated. encouraged, or engaged in by any member of a production. All artists deserve to feel safe amongst all other members of the production team. Here we would include a full definition of sexual harassment under the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Goals: to be able to prevent, identify, and protect theater artists from sexual harassment behaviors without fear of retaliation, and acknowledge and respond appropriately when indiscretions do occur. Tactics: recognize that topics and themes of sexual harassment and/or assault may be tackled in theatrical productions, and therefore must be handled with appropriate care by all parties involved in the process. When in a leadership role, emotional or hierarchical dynamics are not the only dynamics in play. Also regard physical dynamics. People can feel threatened by larger or more intimidating presences, and coercement is as easy as feeling physically minimized by another. Work to present things as neutrally as possible and allow your talent or crew the space to engage with you honestly. Recognize the different forms that sexual harassment can take. It can be explicit and in your face, or subtle and subdued. Some of the most common types of harassment include, but are not limited to, and then we'll include a list here. But I'm not going to read the whole thing. Research and educate yourself and your team on the different types of consent. The types of consent include, but are not limited to, verbal, nonverbal, implied, explicit, written, or electronic. Recognize the subtleties in some of these forms of consent and work to get the clearest yes or no that you can. Maintain professionalism with coworkers in a professional setting, even if there is a personal relationship that exists outside of the production. Avoid favoritism, and do not seek to publicly punish or humiliate someone because of a personal grievance. Actions: avoid inappropriate forms of physical contact, particularly those that take place without the consent of all parties involved. If sexual harassment complaints are filed, it is of utmost importance to protect the privacy of all parties involved. We recommend completing a path to resolution detailed in the resources at the end of this document. Hire intimacy coordinators for your productions when necessary, and follow standards of privacy and protection in those spaces. Questions? I may have missed this, but it's still relevant from online, from Kevin. Also related to the certification, we're talking about intimacy coordinators. Also related to the certification, there is a diversity of ways to refer to those professionals. Some organizations say intimacy choreographer. That's the term for theater often, while intimacy coordinator sometimes is used strictly for film work. And recently, he's noticed intimacy director is being used more frequently. So we might find a way to generalize the term in our document.
I don't know if this would lighten you all's load, but the tactics of recognize that topic and themes, if you plug that into the previous section, and then maybe it's also as you continue to edit the actions items, it's like the path to resolutions detailed in the resources at the end of this document. Maybe it's an acknowledgement of the conversation within this document. And so if you have other questions, please reference our violence and intimacy section, just as a reminder, so that if someone has a sexual harassment problem, they go here and then they're like, oh yeah, there's this other section, or vice versa, so that they're in conversation, even if they are right next to each other, and or other places that might also be applicable as you kind of continue to edit, I think might be helpful for the reader or the user.
On the section of if sexual harassment complaints are filed, it seems like this direction is for the theater itself. Is that pretty much where all this is geared towards? Because I wondered if there should be something, if if an actor filed a sexual harassment complaint and it went like nobody cared about it, or they were basically told that uh, that the theater company had several lawyers and we can handle any kind of slander against it. Where is there a need to put anything in here towards the victim of the harassment?
Yeah, Mark, you bring up a really good point. That's been kind of a thing we've talked about throughout this document, is finding times when we're saying, okay, who exactly are we speaking to here? We're instructing the company, but we also like on a large scale, this is directed toward company leadership, but it also has to be directed toward individual artists, non-producers, picking up this document and saying, how can I help myself be safer? So that's I can't really say yes or no to that right now, but you're bringing up a good point. That is something that we're incorporating in general, is trying to figure out how to make the language more broad to everyone.
The path to resolution.
With
some of that.
With the path to resolution, yeah, some of that is there, yeah.
That's bound to happen.
It's just institutions will protect themselves first, almost always, and boards of directors will protect the institution. And even, like, for example, what happened with the Coterie Theater, the Coterie came out with a report that they published part of the report for the public, and the rest they kept secret for themselves. But in the report, they claimed that no sexual harassment ever happened in the facility of the Coterie. Not true. In the report, they said that no children were ever affected by bad behavior in the theater. Not true. In the report, they said that nobody on staff knew about the actions of the artistic director. Not true. But they published all of that through their internal investigation. And for all of the many people who happen to have been affected by that situation, it's like a slap in the face. And they also can't say, I'm sorry, because legally it makes them culpable. But in many cases, that's all the victim ever wanted, was someone to say, I'm sorry. But I just think it's interesting that a long-running institution was able to get away with lying about three very important things, that you can go out and find a real person in our community to tell you their first-person narrative about how that was a lie.
Sorry. I was in the show at the Coterie when all of that happened. So I have a very intimate knowledge of that situation. And was actively a part of getting whatever I could released. But we're not trying to sorry, it was a very hard time for me because I was a kid that grew up at the Coterie and also experienced this. I played Pigpen. I was Pigpen in Charlie Brown Christmas. And I was also the most established, oldest actor there. And so I became the voice for the cast. And it was a very fraught time. And there was also other sexual harassment that happened in that show separate from the occurrence that blew up. And I had to take care of that outside of what happened in that time. And I will tell you, as much as that document that was released was a little bit of a slap in the face, it was what they had to do so that it would survive. Because we were at a point in the middle of that show where if we went dark, we didn't know if the theater would ever come back. So I just think that is that's just from me being there. It was a really complicated situation. It was really awful for everyone involved. I ended up getting someone fired opposite of the person we're all talking about. So it's complicated. Sorry.
Yeah, and if you wish, I guess, is there anything that you learned in that situation and that process that could help this document be stronger for people in the future. If you
Well, I mean, so how that situation came about and when stuff started coming out in the public. So the cast had never had a conversation about it. No one ever talked to us about it until we started getting asked questions from outside entities. And when you sign a contract, you sign an NDA that you can't talk about the theater while you're being employed by the theater. So I went to the people that I knew at the time, people that had been on the board when I was a child working there, and I said, we need information as a cast because we are the face of the theater. And for the first time in my life, I said, I will not go on stage if something has not been released to the public by Monday. And magically, it was released while I was in the show that day. So, like, there are so many things that it's just like, I love that theater with all my heart, even though there's so much trauma and gray area there, that you just require accountability no matter how hard it hurts. I've never threatened to not go on stage. I am not that person. I have never even called in sick for a show. And I know that's a whole nother era of people. So I just ask that people take it with a grain of salt when using that experience now, because the ability for people to like glaze over it was the reason that behavior occurred for so long. And you're right, everybody did know. So I guess here's my question. Sorry, from that very long rant of my own trauma. When you say avoid favoritism and do not seek to publicly punish or humiliate someone because of personal grievance, how do we make it so that that is not what is allowing people to continue the behavior that is that got us into this position?
To that point, last year, 2025, Kehoe passed something that's called Trey's Law, which bars any NDAs, especially like that covers child abuse claims, to be void. And so if it's some recognition about like the ways that NDAs are used as weapons or tools to silence voices and things like that, or if it's to the point of kind of reframing or just analyzing again that action item of maintaining professionalism and avoiding favoritism, and just kind of that. You could also look into Title IX. Over the past 4 years, there's also been some really weird ways that that's been used. And so reminding ourselves that we are not the law. And so we don't have to, honor without a shadow of a doubt, right? And then Title IX has also changed some of the ways that Title IX is a law that ensures equal access to education free from harassment, and stuff like this. And so when we're talking about sexual harassment, there's been different calibers of truth that have been used in Title IX cases that could also be used to maybe inform the way that we approach this from this documentation and things like that. Because to the point of like believing people and supporting people, it can be really difficult when supporting someone can unfortunately run counter to the success of an organization or your work or things that have happened. And it's very, very complicated, and people are not alone in those experiences. So I just want to say thank you for sharing, but those could maybe be some alternative avenues to maybe reference or look at when informing this section, to that point of like weighing the complicatedness, because it's so hard. It's so hard.
Marley, real quick, can you say what it is that you started with that bars the NDA from being used as a weapon?
Trey's Law. Thank you. Trey. Thank you. So I just wanted to address this sentence: avoid favoritism and do not seek to publicly punish or humiliate someone because of a personal grievance. I think that we can do a better job of making this clear that this is about if a personal relationship existed outside of the theater or the production, and that caused a personal grievance, that's what we're talking about, avoiding favoritism, not if some sexual harassment happens in the thing, in the show or something. That's something that is not what we're saying when do not publicly punish or humiliate.
What do they do if they got someone fired from one theater if they're really terrible?
I'm just saying, like, how do I not trying to ruin someone's career, but also, yeah, if you deserve it. So like, how do you stop that? Like, what can we entail in this so that that cycle isn't perpetuated? Is there anything? Like, that's such a hard question. Is there? Right, I know. So like, how do you? I know. So, but I just don't want people to slide under the radar. I think that's my main thing.
It makes it really difficult in Kansas City because there's so few directors. It's getting better, but it used to be that at the Coterie and at the Unicorn, the artistic director directed almost everything at those theaters for 30 years. And I don't think that's good for theater, personally. I think we need other directors to show their vision and to include people. But if that particular director of that theater who operated that theater for that long had ongoing sexual relations with a number of different actors throughout those years, and thought they could just basically prey upon those actors. And in some cases, it was a real specific type of person that the artistic director went after continually. Usually it's a young 20-something person who's trying to start their career, and he's posing as a mentor to that person and then using alcohol or drugs to take advantage of that person. And what happens is that person leaves the theater completely and never comes back. A lot of people were lost that way. But all these actors have to go before these directors every year to get a role. The same small group of directors are casting all of these theaters. And at the Coterie, the artistic director directed shows at the Unicorn, at UMKC, and at the Unicorn and at the Coterie. So that's a lot of work. And if you've been sexually harassed by that director, you really want to go there and audition in front of them, don't you? I mean, you're going to feel really safe in that environment. So I really feel like this is so good, but I really feel like the institutions are still going to do whatever they can with their lawyers and their board of directors to protect themselves, because everyone loves that theater. You know, I love the Coterie, and most of my best friends, their careers were spent at the Coterie Theater. And one of my best friends, her children and her grandchildren have done plays at the Coterie Theater. That's beside the point. If it's a crime scene, if that theater is a crime scene, then we have to look at it differently. But I don't think in that situation there was justice at all for any of the victims, and that the theater got off very easily without having to acknowledge. They called it non-consenting sex. What's non-consenting sex? It's called rape, okay? And it happened with over 20 people that I know of. Because when I told my story, I had at least 24 people write to me and tell me their story. And that's just what I know, you know? And that's a lot of people. And I know that's part of why you're doing this, and I commend you all so much for it. But I just feel like institutions have the power to like protect themselves, and the victims will be basically blamed for hurting the theater.
And they were in Kansas City.
Yeah, again, Mark, that's really, really helpful insight for us to hear. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we are trying to tackle with this. We've acknowledged that companies have their internal policies. A lot of companies have made good improvements, especially in the past 5-ish years. And the point of this, while we can't enforce a lot of things legally, the point of this is to kind of fill that gap. And we're still sort of discovering together what exactly that can look like. What we want to do is everything that we can do to prevent that kind of culture from continuing. Sometimes it does just come down to not shutting up about it, right? Continuing to talk about it, not being afraid to name names, things like that. A lot of people in this room I know have expressed that bravery just today while we're talking. So if there are suggestions for tangible ways that we can actually change the culture, it's not going to happen tomorrow, right? This is a long-term, slow and steady process, but that is what we're trying to do. So that's really helpful for us to hear.
And we've had a lot of these discussions in the early sections as well that talk about what we're going to do with this document, how we're aiming to get theaters on board, how we're aiming to let people know what theaters are on board. And there's a lot of that discussion. I would encourage you to look at the full document because there's only, like you said, only so much we can do from like a advisory perspective instead of a regulatory or a sort of well, I don't know the other word, I guess an executive branch. So that's where we're headed. And yeah, we understand the frustration and thank you for sharing. Do we have another question? Okay. Yeah.
I do want to articulate, I have worked with the coterie specifically to write documentation that is DEI inclusive. So they go over that at the beginning of every show rehearsal, and everybody is required to sign it after the time that was what it was. So the old coterie is not the coterie that is there now. I just need to say that.
Okay, I believe that's my section. Yeah, let's see. Okay, equal access and accommodations. Physical safety is an essential element of theater production that can easily be overlooked and often taken for granted. A show must go on mentality can lead to ignoring specific needs and safety concerns, including the acknowledgement of both visible and invisible disabilities. Goals. We seek to encourage thoughtfulness and consideration with regards to safety and the ability to approach all situations with flexibility and adaptability. Tactics. Find reasonable accommodations for things like crutches, wheelchairs, etc. If your talent is impaired, how are they navigating this space? If there are no ramps present, how can they be accommodated? If a cast or crew member is religious, work with them to respect their mandatory holidays. Any issues with scheduling due to religion should be discussed prior to and at the time of auditions. If a cast or crew member does not speak English as their first language, find ways to communicate and let them be heard as much as everyone else. Develop a physical language and learn some keywords and phrases in their language that you can use during the process. If you're working with someone who uses ASL, someone else who can interpret must always be present. Respect your talent's mental state and capacity. If you're doing a mentally or physically intense show, or if the talent is going through something in their personal life, respect whatever boundaries they may have. Equal access applies to the audience as well as talent and crew. When possible, ensure that there is space for people with physical disabilities to enter the performance space and sit comfortably. If there is not, make sure to communicate this via your promotional material and signs outside the space. When confronted with an accommodation need, engage in good faith. Don't assume that talent or crew is intentionally being difficult or attempting to gain unfair concessions or treatment from the production. If you are the party in need of accommodation, make this clear early and often. Arrange all accommodations or concessions pre-rehearsal when possible. If something arises during production that results in talent or crew needing time off, engage in good faith. Do not demand evidence such as doctor's notes. Trust your instincts. If a situation feels unsafe, say something. This applies to everyone from director to crew to cast. You should be able to raise your voice if you feel your safety might be compromised. Overall, regard all situations with flexibility. If you make the decision to work with someone who needs accommodations, then it is your responsibility to respect them. Actions. Ensure there is enough room and clear pathways for everyone to maneuver backstage and around the rehearsal area. Allow for breaks as needed or within labor standards. Walk the cast and crew through the space on the first rehearsal, including any known hazards or obstacles to everyone. If you're working with anyone needing accommodations, crutches, wheelchairs, etc., point out where the ramps are located or what the process will be to move them and their equipment from room to room. Make sure that there is a trained professional present for any choreographed fight or intimacy scenes. These scenes should be negotiated early in the rehearsal process and finalized with the consent of everyone involved. As well, the stage manager and/or NED should be present for record keeping and for another set of outside eyes, ensuring safety. This is not to create an atmosphere of reporting and stop rehearsing. This is so everyone feels comfortable enough to do the work required of them. If possible, offer sensory-friendly and ASL interpreted performances. Be mindful of sensory processing challenges and design these performances to be accessible.
I would love for every part of this to be applied at every theater ever. This is a main issue. This is honestly one of the reasons I came today, because as I have a progressive disability, I still want to work, and everybody is afraid of my cane or my wheelchair. So, also, I want to talk along the lines. There's a lot of emphasis in Kansas City theater on making audiences accessible, and very, very little on making stages accessible. So I can enter most theaters, but the fact that right now, currently, if I was in a show, I'd have to be in my chair because I wouldn't be able to stand that long. I don't know of a single theater that I could get completely around in Kansas City other than maybe the Coterie because it's on one level. So this is all applicable, at least for someone with a physical disability. Also, I did just ask. It went to Washington, D.C. It was a cast of completely disabled actors. Everybody had the disability that they portrayed. And it was based off a book by Sonia Sotomayor. So like it can be done, and it can be done very well. You can employ all disabled or neurodivergent people, and a show will go on perfectly. That's all I have to say.
You know, with the one thing about the ASL, and you have interpreters there, you know, they have a program now with the blind that a person who's very familiar with the show, the whole show, as the show's going on. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm on the Arts KC Accessibility Council, and specifically targeting implementing adaptive devices for the blind, for people that are hard of hearing, actually talking to blind people, working with organizations like Easter Seals and well, you know, that one I can't help you with. So yeah, there are organizations that are trying to roll that out into different forms in Kansas City and make that accessible. And that's a part of what Arts KC's Accessibility Council is doing.
Very minor, but as a non-theater person, still working with you all, some of the things that I have done in my role is ensuring access for food and snacks. And so maybe even just being aware of like dietary restrictions or religious exceptions and things, and making sure that staff and crew are aware to not only A, provide those, but B, maybe withhold those, especially considering like specific religious, practices and things like that.
Just noting as well, we've talked a lot about things like adding trigger warnings. Informed consent was brought up. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, fellow committee members, but I think in our past discussions, we've all kind of agreed that this is the section that makes sense to get deep into the details of trigger warnings. While trigger warnings might seem to be really relevant to like the intimacy violence section, for example, equal access accommodations, this is where we're talking about putting things on your poster that say, here's how you get in the building, for example. Here you might see nudity. So this section to me, and feel free to disagree, seems like that's where we need to expand more on things like trigger warnings, for example.
I think that you all are organically doing this, and so sorry to repeat it, but I think again, just leaning into the conversation of the document can really help to kind of bridge that out to the point of content and things like that. Hey, if you do have any questions, please refer to this section, might be helpful as a reader continues to go through it, because this is lovely. It's so awesome. I'm so excited to be here. This is the second time I've been here, but I know we're going to have a few more. So that is to suggest that it is somewhat of a cumbersome document, and it should be, because we're trying to go above the bar. That's the minimum. But maybe perhaps again, just like that user interface, whether that is director levels or like theater levels or even like best practices that people want to just use as needed, would be really helpful.
I was just going to say, one thought I just had about the accessibility and the content warnings being put together. If I was going to the theater by myself and I knew I had no accessibility issues and something started with that, I might not read it all the way through. If I knew I was going with a friend who had accessibility issues, or if I had an accessibility issue, I would read it. But if the content is put with that, I might miss that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for all the hard work that you've been doing on this. And I'm sorry that this is my first time coming to one of your forums and meetings. I've been wanting to come since you first got organized and I first heard about this, because it's people actually doing something to make our community a better place. That's what we're all trying to do, is build our community and make it better for the people that come after us. And so I thank you so much for all of that good work. On the trigger warning thing, I think it might be, I don't know how to do this, but putting a trigger warning at the beginning of your show saying this is going to be part of the show, be prepared for that. But after the show, it's almost like we need to have someone, because we did a show for the Fringe 2 years ago where we talked about an experience of sexual harassment concerning the coterie. And every show we had, there were people that came up to want to talk because they themselves had been in a situation similar and really had never talked about it before. And there's not a lot of time to do that in a Fringe situation, because we have to hurry and break down the stage for the next group to come and get on stage. So there wasn't really a place for that. But I think if we created a place for that, that would help a lot, because the more people talk about it, the better for healing in the community, and the more we can learn about it also. Because I found out things from, a professor at Stevens College who came up to me after the show and said, what you went through in your scene, the exact same thing happened to me. but at a different theater in Kansas City, and that with a male artistic director, and I had no idea, and that was just one person. There were people every show that wanted to talk about it because they just never had that opportunity before.
Thanks for being here.
Again, thank you so much for sharing those. Thank you so much for sharing that. I just wanted to name that first. A strategy that has been utilized, I don't know, I have not been the representative, but talkbacks are often very common generally. And then I know that we're focusing on a lot of like sexual violence in this conversation, which is really important. But as we continue to look ahead for this, also like racial violence and things like that. And so using an action item of if you are having, larger conversations, deep conversations, having a content warning, doing a thank you to the audience for bearing witness, and then providing either a talk back, resources available, and or to the point of hiring intimacy coordinators, and or a talk back that is facilitated by an expert in that field. Whether that is, sexual violence using organizations like our local rape crisis center, or having, the conflict center for conflict resolution, or here's some places that are doing the work now. I know that there are some systems that use like critical understandings like theater of the oppressed and things like that, but just having some other action items to the point of if we are talking about X, Y, or Z thing, how do you take care of yourself after that? And then providing those options for the audiences. And then if they don't feel comfortable, coming up afterwards, at least they get the ball in their court of like alternative resources to then use and things like that.
You have good words. I'm gonna go ahead and be the only physically, visibly, well, not disabled person here and bring it back to equal access and accommodations and just beat this hammer because I want to be cast in shows and say, because that's what this section for me is. Like, I understand warnings and stuff, and like that's all good, but like if I can't even get on the stage, like it doesn't matter what the trigger warning is. I appreciate it, but like at this point, it's like I appreciate a trigger warning, but like my trigger warning is like I shouldn't have to get on my butt and crawl upstairs on my butt to access the stage or to get into a dressing room.
You around makes the theater become very aware, right?
Yeah, but then that means it's my job and my job alone to push that through. So that's why I'm using this forum to be like, cast disabled people and make sure your theaters are accessible.
I'm going to read something from online, but also I just want to ask this question after that. Are you suggesting that content warning should be a different section? So I want to hear you are thinking that. Equal access and accommodations is a separate than a content section. I understand. No, I'm only repeating things that you guys are saying so they can hear it. But yes, I'm not sure it was a tangent. We were asking that question, so it is good information to get from you. So thank you. Now, from online, in regard to the question about addressing content advisories in this section seems. Oh, look, I might have just answered this, but this section seems to be focused on theater professionals. So I don't think a discussion about content advisories on posters would go here. Also, in an earlier session, we discussed the importance of content advisories going on audition disclosure forms. It seems like the content advisories might be appropriate in multiple areas. Thank you. We are coming to the end of our time, so this would be a good time for any questions or concerns that maybe we didn't get to or cover. Is there anything else you wanted to get in, Casey, before we finish? We got about 5 minutes.
No, no, I don't believe that I have anything. If there's no other comments or questions about this section in particular, then yeah, we can go ahead. We can open it up to general Q&A. Yeah, other things we've talked about today.
How do we make theaters become accessible? That's my question. This is me opening it up to a group of people that maybe doesn't function throughout the world the same way I do. So this is me just saying, how would you make your theater experience accessible to somebody else? Because that's what the world looks like. Those are terrible for disabled people, just so you know.
Yeah. State laws. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like that's a lot of this work that we're doing is like Jen knows, asking these huge questions that we're like, we don't have the clear-cut black and white answer to right now, right? That's what this process is, us figuring out together. Changing the culture takes a lot of time. I think part of it is kind of what Phil was getting at, that the presence of people like you, unfortunately, who have disabilities, you have to sometimes be that person, right? You've learned that you have to be your own advocate, because a lot of other people aren't going to be advocating for you in those spaces. Continuing to point those things out, like we talk about things like ramps in here, right? If you go into a space and you say, who, so this is just for able-bodied people, right? This is only for able-bodied people. You don't want people in here who aren't able-bodied. Is that what I'm understanding? As much as we can, trying to encourage people who are in leadership positions to not think about disabled people, other minorities, as the exception, but the rule. To try and shift mindsets to not just saying, what's the easiest way to do this? What's the way it's always been done? How are people going to do this? Thinking first about the people who have the hardest time accessing theater is one thing we can try to encourage as a mindset shift, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that the whole purpose of this document is to make sure that what we're talking about here, you guys are helping with, us with that, is reflected in the document that we end up with, which becomes ammunition for you to take to a theater as well when you're going in and saying, hey, I heard that we've been talking about possibly having a certification or a logo that a theater can use that says we use this document. And so therefore you can go in and be like, hey, remember this that you are all signing up for? Let's make sure that happens. And where is this sort of thing? But also, we're trying to do that to theaters on your behalf too, once we get this document in a place with your help, to have that ammunition to remind theaters that this is their job to make it accessible, but also not dangerous, and a safe place where people belong. Yes.
One more thing, please. Another thing this is reminding me of, because a lot of what we're talking about isn't just culture and mindset, it's about architecture. And so that's something that we obviously can't dictate a lot of, but we can encourage best practices. And again, we can try to influence the way that people are approaching those things before they even have a space. Visiting a space and saying, okay, great, there are stairs, great, there's a stage, guess we got it, is not going to be enough going forward, right? Again, trying to think about disabilities, about discrimination as top of mind rather than the afterthought, right? Did you want to-
Yeah. I say run for public office as a Democrat and legislate the change in the government.
Just so people online know, Jen's not going to shut up about this.
I think it's, yeah, to the point that what was just said, it's easy to say these things, but to walk the walk. And I'm curious if to this section, but then this conversation at whole, again, the framing of the documentation, of reminding ourselves that one of the key things I learned from the Arts KC Grants Council I was on, yeah, really cool, is just like as a reminder, like that ADA is like the base. And there are so many things that we can go up from. And so I know that we can't necessarily call it gold because we'll never be there, but reminding the bar to be set higher and that we should be reaching so that everyone's access is better. Because when you include the most disenfranchised, marginalized individuals at the center of our conversations, focus, upbringing, everyone's going to benefit. And so I don't know if that is like, again, a front facing document, like for framing that you all will use, or just even a simplistic reminder for this section specifically of like, the laws are terrible. The laws are so bad. However, if that's where you're starting, great. I'm glad you're on board. Now that we're here, we have this bar of this wonderful document that you all have spent so much wondrous time. Thank you so much. But just again, reminding ourselves that we should be striving for greatness and not just, expecting normalcy, because it's not cutting it, never has. And it'd be nice to be able to lift everyone up to that. So.
Guys, early on in the process and early on in the document, you discussed well, affairs that had gone wrong, and that the stage manager was the sort of interceptor of all of that, was running shows and would have to have to fill out documents and things like that. You remember us talking about that?
So it sounds like maybe you're getting at the idea of the NED, which is something we've talked about a lot. Yeah, so it's not the stage manager, but it's someone who is voted by their peers, both on, we've discussed about having one for the acting side and one for the crew side, so that someone who is not the stage manager can act as that representative for their team.
I'm thinking some of my stage managers in the past who, were still in high school. And they have enough to do, stage managers do, that they don't need to get themselves caught up in a situation. And maybe one of the two is their director or producer who hired them.
The stage manager's job is to protect the actors. That's part of their job. So if they're not doing that, they're not doing their job. I mean, it's kind of weird because I had a chance to stage manage a musical at the Unicorn that was produced by the Easter Seal Society, and it was written by a guy out of Second City in Chicago, and it had a deaf actress, a blind actor, an actor with spina bifida, two quadriplegic actors, and then four quote-unquote able-bodied actors. That was the term then. And it was a huge learning experience for me. I mean, because we did shows for everyone in the audience was deaf. And we did shows where our blind actor wanted to have his seeing eye dog, which wasn't very well trained, come out and take a curtain call. But we had audience members that brought their dogs to the show, and his dog would try to attack their dogs. The crazy thing about the whole experience was they hired a Second City director who wasn't prepared to deal with actors with disabilities at all. He would yell at the deaf actress, Liz, and I was the stage manager, and I really took it seriously that my job was to protect the actors from the director, and I really feel like if you're a stage manager, to me, that's one of the first things of your job is to make sure actors get breaks, that actors have the right conditions that they're working in. If it's an equity house, there's rules about all of those things. So, Phil, I think that the stage manager is one of the people that has to help uphold this,
Probably, but I guess in my experiences, oh yeah, I've had great stage managers, adults that could handle it, but I've had juniors and seniors doing it too, like in community theater.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much. This was a really excellent discussion today. This is important work. I just wanted to reiterate something that Marley said that I think is a huge, overall theme of what we're doing here, which is that we cannot reach gold, but we can raise the bar. That's the goal here. We are trying to change the culture. We are trying to make this not all talk, which is what a lot has, which is basically what's been happening up until now. So this is us trying to make actionable change, even though it feels very fluid and fuzzy sometimes. You all showing up for this is a huge part of what can make change actually occur. So thank you so much. And I want to say too, reminder that you can always submit feedback online. Reminder that we are always seeking people to join our committee if that's something you have the time and interest in, and look for our next forum this fall. Thank you all very much.